But the next morning I woke up, and if you're a cyclist, this is the dream. I had no saddle soreness at all. And it was just, I've never experienced that, even when I was keto.
George, how did you find carnivore?
So it was around November. It was the final week of November 2021. I was really, really struggling with being overweight and having seriously low energy. And I'd spent probably the last 8 months really trying to find a way to lose weight predominantly. So I was doing loads of really extreme, this is early 2021. I was doing loads of extreme sort of weight loss strategies. And I'd been a personal trainer before, but I think that knowledge had faded a bit. So I was going really extreme, and it was predominantly low calorie strategies. And through my training as a PT, we kind of got taught that, fat isn't really the enemy that you think it is. So that was sitting at the back of my mind this whole time. I was implementing a serious strategy of essentially only eating the carbohydrates that I had already burned that day. So I would do a certain amount of exercise, count those calories, and then that was my calorie allowance for that day. And I did this for a few months, and it was as miserable as it sounds. And I really didn't lose that much weight. So I've been tracking my weight for years, and on the sort of the map of how much weight I've lost, it's barely significant at all. It's a slight decrease. I probably lost about 4 kilos. So when it came to November, I was suffering with really severe low energy. And I had noticed that this got so much worse after eating, but it didn't seem to mirror any particular type of meal. It just would happen after I was eating. So each day I'd be eating one meal pretty much around 5 p.m. because I'd noticed that in the morning and at lunchtime, if I was going to eat, then that would ruin my energy for the whole day. And so come around to November, I decided to implement a zero added sugar strategy, because my thought process was that it was probably the sugar that was causing these energy crashes. So I tried that for probably about a week, and I didn't feel any better at all. And I kind of just followed that logic really of the low sugar thing. And I knew through my not massively extensive, but I had received training in nutrition. I knew that all carbohydrates get broken down into glucose when you eat them. And so I kind of explored the idea of a sort of a ketogenic diet. And that's when I found all of the sort of, particularly the information on YouTube, all of the videos and lectures from all of the low carb conferences and all that kind of stuff. And in November, I decided to embark on a ketogenic diet that had amazing results really quickly. So the first week of the keto diet, which was November 2021, I probably had the worst reaction out of anyone I know. I've recommended this to loads of people, and it's something that I use as a personal trainer now. And I definitely have had the worst reaction. And I think that's probably a reflection on the state of my metabolic health at the time. In the second week, I was doing a course in project management. And that was because at the time that I started the keto diet, I was in the army, and I was transitioning to leave the army in 2023. And so this course was to give me all of the project management skills that I could take forward into future roles. So on that course, I immediately noticed that sort of the thing that everyone notices first, which is that huge boost in mental clarity. And what I'd struggled with before in terms of the energy crashes seemed to have just completely gone. And I remember on one day sitting there at about 1 p.m., 2 p.m. on the course with all my course mates around me, and just noticing them sort of enter that slump period of the day. And I just thought, this is amazing. I've beaten the slump. This is crazy. I'm normally the absolute worst for this. So going on for that, I started it was in week 3 And bear in mind, I had gone keto because A, I wanted to lose weight, and B, I wanted to see if I could address these energy slumps that I was experiencing. In week 3, I started experiencing just periods of spontaneous euphoria. I would just feel amazing, and it would come out of nowhere. It would happen at any time of day. And it was incredibly bizarre. And it's kind of hard to describe, but I would just feel happy. And I can't remember feeling happy for years. I've had depression since, I can't even remember how long I've had depression for, but at the point that I was experiencing euphoria, I'd already been through 8 specialists to try and treat my depression. So this was massive. And literally that week, I cancelled my. I was seeing a counsellor at the time, so not a clinical specialist, but I was seeing a counsellor. I cancelled that, and I stopped taking SSRIs, antidepressants, because I just knew that this was different, this was new, and this seemed to work for me. So that was a huge improvement, and that was in December 21. Going into December 2022, my friend had organized a marathon to take place in Miami. Well, he didn't organize the marathon itself; it was the Miami Marathon. So we're going to fly over to Miami, do a week sort of pre-training and just getting accustomed to the temperature, because it was UK winter and it was 35 degrees in Miami. And I decided before this event, because it was about 3 months from when I started keto, that this marathon was taking place. I had decided, because that's roughly the time it takes to get properly keto adapted. And I thought, I'm going to try and do the marathon in ketosis and see if this is possible. Because I'd heard about, I don't know if you know the athlete, Zach Bitter. He's an ultra endurance athlete. He's got I don't know if it's the American record or the world record, but he has the record for the furthest distance run in 24 hours and the fastest 100-mile run. And he has an exclusively ketogenic lifestyle. He does use some carbohydrates when he actually performs, but he's predominantly ketogenic. And I wanted to sort of test that theory. And so we got out to Miami, and I did this marathon 12 hours fasted and in ketosis. And all I took with me on the marathon was salt pills. And then obviously they had water stations at every mile, I think it was. And yeah, I was absolutely fine. It was really strange. And I didn't hit that runner's wall. I did get an injury because I've always had problems with my knees and ankles, so my time wasn't great. But I didn't hit the wall, and I didn't experience that huge sort of crash that I was fearing. So that really spurred on my motivation. And it was not long after that I had been looking into the sort of carnivore space. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and during this time I was going through a lot of personal transformation, because I was leaving the army. I was coming from a really bad place, and the ketogenic way of eating was really helping with that. And so I was a big sort of fan of Jordan Peterson, and I had looked at his diet, and I thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Particularly because I spent most of my life as a vegetarian. So I think it was around 10 years old, I became a vegetarian. And I think that kind of instilled into me this natural aversion to meat. So I knew that it would be something that I would struggle with. It's beef particularly. If someone's cooking beef, I can't be in the room, because it would make me feel sick. And I think that's kind of linked in my brain to it. It was mostly ethical reasons that I started being a vegetarian. But at the time I was kind of a flexitarian, so I would only eat incredibly highly processed meat. So we're talking McDonald's and Burger King and that kind of stuff that you could pull it apart and not even tell it was meat if you didn't know what meat looked like.
Wow. So can I just jump in, sorry, to clarify? So when you were keto, were you eating meat at that point?
Yes, sometimes. So bacon, and eggs were things that I could tolerate really easily.
Okay. Okay.
Mm.
Thank you.
I think, yeah, there's just something about bacon that I think is just it's just so delicious that even as a vegetarian, it still tastes good. Um, but for most of my meals, I was using corn, um, which is a sort of it's basically mushrooms that have been formed to look and kind of taste a bit like meat. So I was using that as the base. That was where I was getting the majority of my protein from. Um, but yeah, after the marathon, I kind of decided that I wanted to see how far I could take this and see how optimal I can make my diet. And so I decided to try and go closer and closer to carnivore. I did this primarily through eating way more bacon and way more eggs because I could tolerate those fairly well. And then sort of progressing towards beef. Beef was really tricky for me to sort of mentally crack. I was using burgers. I was trying to cook steaks, but as an ex-vegetarian, I didn't really know how to cook it. So I thought in my mind, I thought the best thing to do was make it as sort of well done as possible, cook it as much as possible, and then it's removing it further and further away from the source of it being sort of raw meat. Um, and yeah, that was just not a good idea. But as I sort of continued to experiment, I found that weirdly, the more raw the meat is, the easier it was for me to tolerate, which was completely backwards from what I expected to happen. All the way to the point where just a couple of weeks ago, I had a mouthful of raw steak, and it was actually quite nice. So that's something that I'm looking to experiment with now. Particularly as I've seen one of your previous guests, and she said that she enjoys eating raw meat, and that she finds that if she eats raw meat, then she doesn't feel that she needs to eat as much. So could be a cost saving benefit as well to that. But yeah, I think it was quite nice. So going through this, I was progressing more and more into a meat diet. I was eating a lot of cheese, a lot of dairy, just to keep my calories up, and keep the sort of the costs down, because steak is expensive, and even to this day, mince I'm still sort of funny about mince. I don't know what it is, but I had booked myself onto something called the Pan Celtic, which is an ultra endurance 1,450-mile bike race. A road bike race. Well, they told us it was a road bike race, and the experience was slightly different from that. And this was starting in Brittany, in the northwest of France. We do about 800 miles in Brittany, then get the ferry over to the UK, cycle from the south of England all the way up to the top of Wales. That was the route. And I decided to do this carnivore. So slightly different for the marathon. Now I'm eating only animal-based products. And it went sort of flawlessly up to a point. So I started on day one, and like I said, it wasn't quite as road as we were expecting. We did about 50 miles on gravel tracks, which when you're riding a road bike with all of the things you need on it isn't really ideal. And it was like a gate every kilometer, that was bordering the gravel track from the road, so to allow road crossings. So it was constantly stop, start. And if anyone's ever cycled in Brittany, it's non-stop. You're either cycling uphill or downhill. So it's really, really challenging sort of terrain. But I was eating essentially butter, cheese, and deli meats because I couldn't cook. So I had to eat whatever was available. And we started on a Sunday, and the shops in Brittany are very, very few and far between. So it's a real challenge that I hadn't really anticipated in terms of being able to get that food. But what I sort of realized the first night, I felt great. I ate an entire block of butter in the middle of a town, and people were just looking at me like I was the most insane person ever. But I got all the energy I needed. I felt great. That night, I just slept in a wood. And what I didn't realize was that in France, wild boar just sort of roam the woods. So I woke up later that night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, to the sounds of something really, really heavy getting closer and closer. And then it just started screaming at me, and it was pitch black. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what this beast was. So I started like flashing lights and screaming and trying to find my penknife to defend myself. But it was, yeah, a crazy experience. But the next morning I woke up, and if you're a cyclist, this is the dream. I had no saddle soreness at all. And it was just, I've never experienced that. Even when I was keto, and sort of doing, I didn't train enough for this event, but I was doing some training. I was getting out on the bike every so often. And so I had absolutely no saddle soreness. And this happened day after day after day. And even as the days went on, and I'm cycling, between 120, 140 miles a day, and absolutely no pain at all, no inflammation. And I definitely attribute this to the carnivore diet, because it mirrors the other experiences I've had in terms of physical performance and strength training, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was just absolutely phenomenal. Unfortunately, it only lasted about 3 days. I ended up, after a horrendous day of rain, stuck in a small French village where nothing was open. There was no food available except for the hotel food, and they didn't have steaks or anything like that on the menu. So I had to kind of capitulate because I needed some kind of energy, and I ended up coming off the carnivore for that day, which was really heartbreaking for me, because I wanted to push this all the way to the end. And then I ended up getting a knee injury. I damaged my meniscus. So I had to pull off at about 650 miles in. So I was about almost halfway, which is a really real shame. But I've got, I will go back and I will do it. I've still got the route, so I will do it fully carnivore. But after that,
next time you'll be prepared for the wild boars too.
Yeah, I'll take some I don't know what, nets, electric fences, hunting rifles, I don't know. But that would be a good source of when the shops are closed.
Yeah, knife and fork.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, after that, I came back to the UK, and I ended up getting down to the lowest weight I had ever recorded for myself, even when I was a personal trainer. So I started keto at, I think I was just over 100 kilos. And after that race, I was down to 78 kilos, which is the lightest I'd ever been. And I think this is more because I'm a man, and I've been used to being sort of bigger for such a long time, whether it's, muscle or fat or whatever. I think being bigger it's kind of like a manly thing, isn't it? I suppose. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and just seeing myself really, really lean. And some of my friends were saying, "You're looking so lean, you're looking skinny," and all that kind of stuff. And that really sort of triggered this sudden realization of, oh, I don't have anywhere near as much muscle as I thought I had. And so that's when I decided to go into strength training and start doing that. So still on the carnivore diet, I started doing about 3 sessions a week and sort of finding my feet again from my days as a personal trainer. And it was also around this time as well that I was deciding to look into going back to being a personal trainer, because it's probably the one job that I've had in my life that I really, really enjoyed, helping other people to sort of lose weight, gain strength, build confidence, improve health, all that kind of stuff. It's incredibly rewarding. So I was in the gym about 3 times a week, and the first thing I noticed was that I wasn't getting muscle soreness at all. And this is something that I'd heard from Anthony Chafee, who I was listening to a lot at the time. And honestly, when I first heard it, I thought it was complete rubbish. I thought he was making it up. It's another one of those carnivore things that I thought, okay, that's too far. Okay, wind it back. You're being silly now. But yeah, I wasn't getting any muscle soreness at all, which was incredible, because it meant that I could feel better after working out, and I could recover quicker because there was less inflammation. What I also noticed, and this is probably a great tragedy, is that I wasn't experiencing a muscle pump in the gym. So when you're working out, you're lifting heavy weights, your muscles start to swell up, and that's when you catch yourself in the mirror and you think, yeah, I look good today. And that's kind of the motivation to go back to the gym, is to look good. And yeah, great tragedy of the carnivore diet is you don't get that pump, unfortunately, but that has really good performance benefits. I've noticed that you just generally fatigue a lot more slowly in the gym. So if I'm doing something that creates a lot of systemic fatigue, which is sort of whole body fatigue, like deep squats with heavy weights or pull-ups or anything like that, I noticed that you recover way, way quicker on carnivore. And well, this is my experience, at least. And it's kind of hard to explain, but if you're just doing bicep curls set after set after set nonstop, eventually it will get to the point where your biceps are starting to hurt, and they just feel, even though you kind of keep pushing, they're starting to feel tired. And it's not like the muscles are getting weaker necessarily. They just hurt. They feel tired. But when I'm eating carnivore, that doesn't happen at all. And they are getting weaker, yes, obviously, because they're fatiguing as you go through the workout. But I find that I'm able to just keep it going for longer. So yeah, in terms of physical performance, carnivore specifically over keto has definitely had huge benefits. And then other things I noticed around carnivore is my body odor had gone, which is something that no one had warned me about or sort of said. That's another thing that I probably would have thought that's complete rubbish as well. Body odor disappeared completely. I found that my hunger signals were they're much more routine, and they happen at the same time every day, and they're less confusing than when on keto. And it really helped clear up my skin. When I started keto, I was suffering with a rash on my chest, and I was also suffering with something called angular cheilitis, which is where the corner of your mouth splits open. And the reason that I got that was because I was taking citalopram, which really dries out the mouth, and then that can cause a buildup of, like, a concentration of saliva, which, yeah, it's pretty disgusting, but causes that to separate. Keto kind of solved the angular cheilitis pretty quickly, and it made the chest rash go down a bit. But then there was a resurgence of the chest rash after some time, which surprised me. When I went on carnivore, that disappeared completely and hasn't returned since. So that was a huge benefit. And after all this, I kind of decided this is how I'm going to live now. And it's one of those things that when you start experiencing these things, it's like, oh, what have I done? Now I can't go back. I've gone too far. The benefits are so good that I can't go back.
So yeah, you can't imagine going back to you mentioned the hunger signals, the crazy hunger signals, the constant eating and thinking about food and stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
Not to mention putting the weight back on and things like that.
Absolutely. And I've suffered with binge eating since I was a child. And I suppose I never really thought of it as binge eating until about maybe 4 years ago, I suppose. But that was getting really, really extreme. And I think it was a big part of my chronic fatigue, because my eating was really secretive. I would never eat in front of others. And in those evenings where I wasn't eating breakfast or lunch because I was at work and I didn't want to crash, I'd come home and then I'd just binge beyond belief. And it was getting really extreme, where I had this kind of fear of, every time I would eat, I'd have a fear of running out of food. So what I'd do is I'd go to the supermarket and I'd buy more food than I could possibly eat, because that would allow me to sort of retreat back into my home, lock the doors, shut the curtains, and just eat and really binge. And as time went on, it just got worse and worse. And at the weekends were the worst for me, because I felt so exhausted from the week that I would wake up, binge, sleep, binge, sleep, binge, sleep. And it was just a constant cycle all the way through until Monday. And you can imagine what kind of impact this had on my social life. and any work that I had to catch up from the week during the weekend was just not going to happen because I was just absolutely, exhausted. So keto suppressed my appetite, and it helped with the cravings after a certain amount of time. But carnivore, it removes that gray area, because it's like with smoking or with drinking. If you wanted to quit those things, you wouldn't say, I'm quitting that now, but I'm going to have, 50 grams of nicotine every evening. It wouldn't work, because you're constantly feeding that addiction, even if it's a tiny amount. And that gray area is, I think, where that facilitates a kind of a relapse. And so with carnivore, I found it much easier to avoid relapses. So it's definitely helped with the binge eating.
Nice. So what is your eating like daily now?
It varies quite a lot in terms of what I actually eat, but generally I will have either OMAD or TUMAD. So I will either eat at 3 o'clock and then again at about 5 or 6 o'clock, or I will push through until about 5, and then I'll eat one sort of big meal. But I'm able to eat steak now, so I eat as much as I can generally afford. So that's great for me. I eat a lot of bacon. I eat a lot of butter. So sometimes, like today, I woke up feeling quite hungry, which is unusual for me. So I threw loads of butter in my coffee. So I am having coffee as well. That's something I'm trying to cut down on. I also eat mince. I eat eggs sometimes, not as often as I used to, and I am still having some dairy. So I have double cream, so like heavy cream, and I have raw milk sometimes.
So you've got over the aversion to mince now?
It's still a bit of a funny one. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think it comes down to, because I've covered depression, but I've also experienced anxiety since I was, since I was 10 years old. So that's been a big factor for me. And I know that it's quite common with people with anxiety to be really, really picky about their foods and be really sort of funny about foods they're not familiar with. So I kind of wait until the time's right. I have mince in the freezer. Some days I will just wake up, and if I'm hungry enough, I just know I'll be okay with mince today. But I get my mince from, there's a farm local to me. It's the place that does the raw dairy. So I'm really lucky to live near a farm that sells raw dairy, and they sell really, really high quality mince. So I buy that. The stuff in the supermarket just looks, I don't like the look of it. It looks unnatural. Yeah.
That's really interesting to consider the connection between the anxiety and the kind of pickiness for food. Because
Yeah.
it just makes me think of myself as a child, when I was like, "Oh, I can't eat that, and I can't eat that, and there's too much fat on that, and there's this on this," and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just anxiety is just sort of generally a fear of anything going wrong. So I suppose you're just less likely to try new things, and food is just one of those. Like if I don't eat sausages anymore, because they generally, you don't know what they contain, basically. But I remember if I was eating sausages at any time, if there was a tiny piece of, say, cartilage or something in there, that would be it for the whole meal. I wouldn't be able to eat anything else. It would completely turn me off, and I'd just throw everything into the bin. So I kind of have a fear of things like that happening. It sounds ridiculous, but this is the sort of space of anxiety, I suppose.
Wow. So how have people around you reacted, like family and friends? Are they supportive? Are they more like, "Oh, what's happened? Why are you doing this kind of caveman diet? What's going on?"
It's a good question. I think people still kind of remember me as I was. and because they see me every day or most days, it's been like a 6-month process for me to go from 105 kilos and ill to sort of 80-ish kilos and well. And it's almost like they've forgotten, in some respects, they've forgotten what I used to be like and how bad I used to be. And in some respects, they kind of remember, like my friend went to Cyprus not too long ago and he brought back a t-shirt, and the t-shirt was size extra large. And I was the leanest I would ever been. And I was like, I wear size small t-shirts.
So it was like a dress.
Yeah, it's just hung up in. I don't know what to do with it. It's just hung up in my wardrobe. But it's like, can you not see? Can you not see me? Yeah, most of my friends. It's one of those things. It's really hard to get through. I've always, because I tried the vegan diet a couple of years ago, and I thought that was the solution to everything for all of a week. And so I think I was trying to probably impress that on friends in the hope that they will acknowledge the thing that I hope is the cure. So maybe they're just sick of me and my diet. But I mean, but then when I talk to them, between me and my mum, we've come off 14 medications between the two of us. And when I say things like that, they just assume I'm crazy, and they're just sort of, it's easier to disregard what I'm saying than it is to sort of contemplate the possibility that we're carnivores and this is what we should eat, and that everything is making us sick, and that governments and food companies and agricultural industry are conspiring to make money by making us sick. Like that's I don't want to touch that. It's easier just to think George is crazy.
So your mum's doing carnivore as well?
Yeah, so she, gosh, I don't know when she started. I think she started around the same time as me, which was before the Pan-Celtic race. So that must have been April or May 2023. She had been, it's quite strange because she and I both sort of stumbled across low carb roughly around the same time. I think she was looking at it as, the traditional sense of low carb, and I was looking at it a slightly more extreme ketogenic perspective. And so we talked about it, and she had noticed, I think this was at Christmas, so this was a month after I'd started, and had all of these sort of mental health improvements. And she was well aware of all of my mental health challenges, and I think she probably noticed the change in me. And unlike the times that I was trying to sell her the vegan diet, this was me just demonstrating through my personality and physical changes that I was better. And so I think that's what pushed her to try it out. And she has had, one hell of a medical sort of journey in terms of medical challenges. And when she started carnivore in May, it really started to improve pretty much all of her health. I think around May, she'd been ketogenic for a while, and she had managed to get rid of about 6 medications. And then following carnivore, she was able to dump a further 5. So up to 11 medications, which was just phenomenal. But I remember going to see her before all of this, and she was wearing these kind of fingerless compression gloves because of she had arthritis in her hands. It was osteoarthritis, so it degrades the joints. It's not something you can recover from. It's something that you can stop, but then the joints are still degraded. Yes, she had these compression gloves, and I would remember we would just be sitting having a conversation. It could be, at her home or in a coffee shop or something like that. And she would just sort of bend over and just be in immense pain for about 30 seconds to a minute. And it was debilitating. And she really struggled to do anything with her hands. So yeah, I went back to see her after she'd started carnivore, and she literally looked about 5 years younger. Like her skin looked amazing, and the gloves weren't on. She'd taken the gloves off, which was great. And she wasn't experiencing any pain in her joints, which was just incredible. I mean, considering the joints have degraded, she still very rarely gets joint pain, which is unheard of.
It's awesome. It's it's just, that everyone can benefit from this in some way, and just stop all the kind of things we take for granted as either aging problems or just something we're stuck with.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
amazing, right?
absolutely. And it's I'm sort of working in the gym with a friend of mine at the moment, and he's 36 years old, and he's got these sort of joint complaints and back problems. He says, I'm just getting to that age now. It's like, no, no. You're 36, you should be in your prime, but this is just what we're told to believe, that we just slowly age and things just slowly get worse, and that's absolutely not the case.
Exactly. Just on these kind of things that can improve, I just want to go back to the when you decided you were done with the SSRIs. It was kind of, you had that feeling of euphoria when
Mm-hmm.
you were still on keto. After, like you said, you don't remember ever being happy.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that must have felt like such a strange feeling.
It was borderline sort of frightening. I didn't know what to do with it, and I've heard of people with, if you're bipolar and you're considering a ketogenic diet, then you should do so with really close supervision. And I can see why, because if they have a manic episode and these experiences at the same time, then that could be genuinely dangerous. So it was such a huge shift in mood that, yeah, it was a little bit frightening, but at the same time, you don't really care, because for the first time you feel good. And when you suffer with chronic anxiety and depression, even your happiest moments still have this baseline negative feeling. And so to feel that sort of euphoria, it's really liberating, and just it's empowering, because you feel like you're in control.
When you're in the gym now, when you're doing training with other people, do you talk to them about carnivore and say, oh, your results could be a little bit better if you're kind of eating this way?
So I train in a small personal training studio, which is, I also have a contract with them, so I do personal training in there as well. But I do speak to everyone that I can, especially the chap who owns it, and I always sort of go on about the benefits, and I've not really, they're not really taking to it too well. No one's ever challenged what I've said, but I've noticed he eats more beef though. Sometimes he'll buy some pastrami, but it kills me when I see him sat there eating chicken, because it's in the PT space. It's all about lean meats and all that kind of stuff. So that bugs me. But he started bringing in beef more, which is good. But it was 2 days ago. I was just coming to the end of a 3-day fast, and I hit a PR on pull-ups, which was great. At that point, I was 2 days fasted, so hitting a personal record was pretty cool. And I made a big point of that. But yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think anyone's taken it on yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, when you talk about the chicken, I think the stereotype I've got of like people building muscle is, it's the chicken breast and the broccoli or something like that.
Yeah, and rice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rice.
There's this belief in the sort of exercise world that you need to eat carbohydrates to spike your insulin, because you need insulin to grow muscle. which really isn't true. Most people in the carnivore community know, you get an insulin rise with protein that's sufficient for what it needs to do, and the main thing required for tissue growth is insulin-like growth factor 1, which isn't insulin. So that's probably where the confusions come from. But if you look at all of the famous, or sort of the bodybuilding community now, if you look at the top bodybuilders, like Ronnie Coleman is a really good example. They look very different to sort of the bodybuilders of what's called the golden age. So think sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger, people like that. They had really, they could do that sort of stomach tuck, where they would tuck in their abdomen and you could see underneath their rib cage. Modern bodybuilders can't do that because they're using all of these high sugar diets along with their protein to get that protein, because they think that gets that protein in. And that's why when you see the modern bodybuilders, they have these huge pot bellies now. They've got abs on them, but that's all visceral fat.
That's right. Yeah, it's all that kind of sort of barrel stomach, right? Yeah. Just to follow on from what you were saying about fasting, how often do you use fasting, and what is fasting for you?
So fasting, to be honest, at the moment, I'm using it primarily for experimentation, because I think there's all of the research at the moment is in the context of someone who eats a high carb diet, or the sort of standard Western diet. And so when you get to a year in of carnivore, there's not much research telling you what you should and shouldn't do. So I fast. I mean, I pretty much do a 24-hour fast most days because I'm OMAD a lot of the time. In terms of anything beyond sort of 36 hours, I'd say probably once a month. This was my first time doing a 72-hour fast, purely to sort of test the water and experiment. And the thing I was most interested in was how it would impact my ketone levels, because this is the area of research that I don't think exists at the moment, is what happens to levels of ketones when you've been zero carb for a year. And after 3 days, my ketones hit, the highest they got to was 0.9, it was 0.6, which is just in nutritional ketosis. And had I fasted for that long when I just started keto, I would have expected to see ketone levels of 4 or higher. So 0.6 was really low. And I think, having looked at all of the sort of literature available, anything that I could find, it appears to be the case that once your body becomes efficient enough at using ketones, it then transitions into oxidizing fat instead. So it still produces ketones, but it's shifted from using ketones as a fuel to predominantly using just free fatty acids as fuel.
So where does this go for you from here in terms of what you're going to do with diet and gym and fasting and things like that?
So personally, I want to progress closer and closer towards more of the lion diet. I'm going to experiment a lot more with eating raw foods to see how I get on with that. I think it's a long process of healing my relationship with food, both from the perspective of getting away from my binge eating disorder and my food addiction, because as far as I see it, I think I will always be a carb addict, no matter how long I stay away from them. I think that will always be in there. And then in terms of the food that I do eat, it's just a case of getting the most nutritionally dense, natural foods. So eating much more meat. Finally getting over my aversion to mince. Just because it's the cheapest food. that's the main reason, I think. Because I could eat steak all day, but it's expensive. But in terms of the gym, yeah, I'm just looking to. So over the last 6 months of strength training, I've gained about 4 kilos of muscle, which doesn't sound a great deal, but that normally takes about a year to grow. So I'm really happy with that, and I think carnivore's massively helped me along with that. Going further on, looking still to build strength and obviously expand my. I'm looking to transition to becoming a full-time personal trainer, which, in terms of sort of earning potential, is definitely a step back, but it's something that I love doing, and so I want that to become, my life going forward.
So, for someone who's getting started, what advice can you offer them about getting onto carnivore and sticking with it?
I think at the start you need to have that moment of waking up, looking in the mirror, and either through what you're feeling when you wake up, maybe you're suffering with some kind of condition, physical pain or anything like that, or you're just unsatisfied with, like I was, you're unsatisfied with your appearance and all that kind of stuff. You kind of need to have that moment of looking in the mirror and saying, screw that. I'm doing something different. And that's a big moment, and you need to capitalize on it, because people have those moments all the time, but it's useless if you do nothing with it. I think the next stage is deciding what it is that you're willing to sacrifice, because the problem with carnivore is you kind of need to live your life differently. You can't go to all of these parties and big events unless you have the confidence or a sort of particular strategy to stop yourself from indulging, because particularly in those early days, those temptations will be everywhere. And so you need to decide, because a lot of people I talk to about this, and the clients that I've coached so far, they seem to exist in this gray area where they want you to provide them with a solution. And unfortunately, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. If you want to improve, then unfortunately, you're going to have to give something up. And a lot of people aren't necessarily prepared to do that. So you need to be prepared to do that. In terms of the diet itself, I think it's just a case of do whatever it takes to get closer to. Actually, if you can tolerate just eating nothing but meat from day one, then great. That's absolutely perfect. But I suspect that most people can't. And so I'd say if that seems unpalatable for you, then try a ketogenic diet. If you're struggling with, ravenous hunger and cravings and all of that kind of stuff, then that's fine. But just do whatever you can to stay in ketosis, because that's the hard bit, is getting used to that feeling first. Once you're in ketosis, you can basically modify your diet however you like, and it shouldn't impact you much at all.
Nice. So, George, how can people get in contact with you? Do you have a website or social media?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's www.metabolicpt.com. And then I have a separate YouTube channel, which is at the Carnivore PT. I keep these separate because I'm focusing on different things with both of them. My website is for my PT practice, which is in person and online coaching, where I sort of focus on metabolic roots of health, whatever that means for the individual. And then my YouTube channel, the Carnivore PT, I use that predominantly for people who are interested in or are currently doing a carnivore diet, who are looking to improve fitness, improve mobility, and all those kind of health factors. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, then you can go on my YouTube channel. My email's on there, or you can just send me an email through the website.
Awesome. And I'll link to both of those below. George, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your story with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's a pleasure. And I absolutely love the community you've built. It's so supportive and so positive.